Yes. Bom fim de tarde agora, né, pessoal? Quase noite. Agora nós teremos a nossa palestra de encerramento com a Bhikshuni, a monja plenamente ordenada, Karma Lekshe Tsomo. E o título da sua fala é O Budismo e a Equação de Gênero. I'm gonna read your short biography now. Bhikshuni Karma Lekshe Tsomo, nascida Patrícia Zen, é professora na Universidade do Havaí e professora aposentada da Universidade de San Diego, onde ensina budismo, religiões mundiais e morrer, morte e justiça social. Passou 15 anos estudando o budismo em Dharamsala. Fez seu trabalho de pós-graduação na Universidade do Havaí em Manoa, obtendo um PhD em filosofia comparada. Sua pesquisa envolveu principalmente mulheres no budismo, morte e morrer, filosofia e ética budistas. Ela é cofundadora da Associação Internacional Sakyadhita de Mulheres Budistas e diretora fundadora da Fundação Jamyang, que apoia a educação de mulheres e meninas na região do Himalaia. Ela vai dar a palestra em inglês e a monja Fernanda vai traduzir no chat para vocês lerem de maneira que seja mais fluida a tradução, ok? Mais rápida. So, thank you, Venerable. We can start when you're ready.
Hola, aloha everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today and honored to join you on International Women's Day. This is wonderful. So happy to see the conference that you've organized, and may you all be well and healthy. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here in Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, on the lands of the Hawaiian people, and to honor all of those who have preserved Hawaiian spiritual and cultural traditions for many centuries. We're in the middle of a tropical storm, so you may hear the wind blowing very loudly, but luckily the rain has stopped and the sun is shining and everything is very beautiful. So sending lots of aloha to everyone in Brazil and all of you who are attending this wonderful conference. The story of women in Buddhism is 2,500 years long. So I would like to show you some images of the story, the history of women in Buddhism, and to try to untangle or explain what I see as the gender equation as we go along. So I would like to share the screen now and share my slides with you. Can you see the image?
Yes.
Everyone can see. Okay, great. So we begin by understanding or discussing the aim of Buddhist practice, which is to transform the mind, to awaken the mind. And women, men, and people of all different gender identities have consciousness. The Buddhists use the word consciousness. And in consciousness, in the nature of the mind, there is no male, female, or other type of gender identity. There is simply clear knowing and awareness. That is the definition of consciousness, and that is what we are concerned with. transforming our current state of mind, which is deluded with all kinds of different, greed, hatred, ignorance, and all of that, into an awakened state of consciousness. So, according to the Buddha, we all have the potential to do that. It's just a matter of our own effort, our spiritual practice, our dharma. In the nature of the mind, there is no genitalia. It would be a ridiculous concept to think that mind itself has a gender. Gender is more likely conditioned by our social environment and the signals that we get from the time we're very small. So the Buddha started out on a really good footing, that women have the potential to achieve awakening. And this is one of the clearest statements of any world religion. So it's very inspiring to think on this International Women's Day that we have the power to awaken ourselves and awaken our society in the process. So let's begin at the beginning. Buddhism began with Mother Maya, Queen Maya, who was the mother of the future Buddha. And here is a representation of her conceiving of the young prince, Siddhartha. As the story goes, she conceived not in the ordinary messy way, but through a dream of a white elephant. So this maintained her purity as the mother and the purity of the young prince. Neither one was contaminated by female bodily fluids. So this is part of the gender equation. Why are women's bodies often portrayed as polluted? The last time I checked, men's bodies had the same dirty substances inside as women's. This is the human situation. Blood and pus and all of this. But why is bodily pollution associated with women in many cultures? I guess we could say most cultures. So in this case, in the Buddha narrative, we find that the Buddha and his mother are spared from this kind of pollution by being conceived in a dream, and then the young prince takes birth, not through the vaginal canal, but from the right side of his mother, completely clean and pure. And the people rejoiced. Now, the young prince grew up in the palace, and he enjoyed many pleasures, many advantages. He unfortunately lost his mother when he was 7 days old. And this is another point that we need to interrogate or question from a feminist perspective. It's as if Mother Maya appeared on the scene only to give birth to the young prince, and then she disappears from the story. But fortunately, he was raised by his aunt, who was his mother's sister. So the queens were both married to the king. So when the young prince's mother died, he was raised by Mahapajapati, who later becomes the first Buddhist nun. She raised him with great love and affection, as if he were her own son, her own child. She nurtured him, nursed him, and he grew up to be a fine young man. He enjoyed 4 palaces, and as the story goes, 40,000 girlfriends in the harem, in the palace. And one of the stories we find in the texts, and we only have stories, mind you, we don't have historical evidence for any of this. But we have many stories, and the storyline is similar in all of them. One episode is that the Buddha came in and saw the women in his harem sleeping, snoring, drooling, all disheveled. And he felt aversion to the women. He felt a little bit, they actually say disgusted. So this alerts us that the Buddha stories send mixed messages. There's some very positive images of women in the Buddha's texts. The Buddha himself praised many of the women for their spiritual and ethical qualities. And he recognized women's potential from the very beginning. But we also find other images that are not so flattering. And this is one of them. Yeah. Okay. The next important episode in the history of women in Buddhism is that the young prince, sensing that this life in the palace was not his final goal, he was dissatisfied with it and made the decision to leave the palace, which meant leaving his beautiful wife and newborn son. Now, in a contemporary analysis, this would not be favorable. To leave one's wife and newborn son in the dead of night is not a noble thing to do. Someone even wrote an article called, "Was the Buddha a deadbeat dad?" Meaning one who abandoned his family. In the Buddhist world, it's seen quite differently. It's called the Great Renunciation. And the Buddha is praised for making the decision to leave the palatial life of luxury and even to leave his family and his wife and child in order to seek the meaning of life, to awaken in order to benefit all of humanity. So this ideal that benefiting all of humanity is more important than one's own personal benefit. So that's another part of the equation. The Buddha wandered in the forest, practicing meditation and so many ascetic practices, especially fasting, which was very important in that day in the Brahmanical tradition, what we now call Hinduism. He got so thin that he had no energy left to meditate. So after 6 years, he decided to accept an offering of rice pudding from a young woman in the village. Her name is Sujata, and to regain his strength so that he could continue his quest for enlightenment, his quest for awakening. He accepted her offering, became strong again, walked across the river, the Ranjana River, and found a tree, sat down under the tree, and made a determination not to get up until he had reached the final goal. So he reached the goal of enlightenment. He started a monastic order for men. All the men that he knew came, hundreds of them, mostly aristocrats, but he accepted anyone into his monastic order. And after 5 or 6 years, his stepmother, an auntie, Mahapajapati, also requested to join the order. Now, according to the story, the Buddha hesitated to admit women to the order. The latest research confirms that his hesitation was due to his worry that the women would not be safe. Wandering in the forest is dangerous for women. It was dangerous then and it's dangerous today. And so he tried to convince Mahapajapati to stay at home and to practice in the safety of her home. Shave her head, wear the robes, yes, but to stay safely at home. But she did not agree. She did not accept this proposal. Instead, she shaved her head, put on these garments, and with 500 women, walked clear across northern India to where the Buddha was teaching, to ask again to be admitted to the monastic order. She found a friend in Ananda, the Buddha's cousin and attendant, who advocated for the women. He said, Mahapajapati was so kind. When you were young, she nursed you and took such compassionate care for you. Don't you think that she should be admitted to the order? And finally, the Buddha agreed. Yes, fine. And so that was the beginnings of the Bhikshuni Sangha with Mahapajapati. The order grew when hundreds and thousands of women joined, leaving behind their families and achieving great realization, for which the Buddha praised them publicly. Okay, so this is also part of the gender equation. The Buddha's affirmation not only of women's potential, but of their accomplishments in meditation, in teaching, in miraculous deeds, many different aspects. He would recognize these women publicly. He taught for 45 years all over northern India to many different audiences, all different social statuses, genders, ethnicities, ages. Everyone was welcome to hear the Buddha's teachings, and many women did so. Thousands of women were happy to attend his teachings and to put them into practice. The Buddha described the ideal Buddhist society as being composed of 4 different pillars: the lay men, lay women, the ordained men, and the ordained women. So we call them Upasaka, Upasika, Bhikkhu, and Bhikkhuni. Now, you can see that the nuns didn't get their hands on the Dharma wheel, but at least they got in the picture. You'll notice to the right a figure in white. And this painting comes from Laos, where there are no fully ordained nuns. And so the women there have found a middle way to practice as a monastic, wearing white, living a celibate life, devoting their lives to the practice, even though they don't have the opportunity to take full ordination. So the order of Bhikkhunis, full ordination for women, lasted for up until the 11th century. So that would be 1600 years. Quite remarkable. And it finally died out in India, probably due to famine. If there's no food, who is going to join a monastic order? Also in Sri Lanka, the order died out around the same time. But that's quite amazing that the order for women did endure for so long. Now, fortunately, before the order died out in India, it was transmitted to Sri Lanka. You may know the story of Emperor Ashoka. who was a great warrior who conquered many different countries in northern provinces or kingdoms in northern India. And then one morning woke up to see all the dead body and regretted his actions and became a Buddhist, a very sincere Buddhist who did many great works for the people. He had a son who was a monk and a daughter who was a nun. And this is she. Her name was Sanghamitra, friend of the Sangha. Her brother, Mahinda, went to Sri Lanka, where he gave Buddhist teachings and ordained many hundreds of young men as monks. The queen came and said, I would also like to become a member of the Sangha, the monastic order, so please ordain me. And Mahinda said, oh, it's wonderful that you have the aspiration to become a nun, but I cannot do it because I'm not a nun. But my sister is a nun, so we can invite her to come and ordain you. So they invited Sanghamitra to come from northern India. You can see the ships in the background. She sailed all the way from northern India down to Sri Lanka. And she brought with her a sapling of the Bodhi tree. It's a descendant of the tree under which the Buddha achieved awakening. Sanghamitra is very famous for this. And the descendant of that tree is still in Anuradhapura in northern Sri Lanka. She's also famous for initiating the order of fully ordained nuns in Sri Lanka. In fact, there's a national holiday in Sri Lanka named after her, Sanghamitra Day. And as far as I know, this is the only national holiday in the world named after a woman. So that's quite remarkable. Another famous figure in Buddhist history, especially Sri Lankan Buddhist history, is the story of Hema, the woman on the right, who took a tooth of the Buddha, a relic, the sacred tooth, and hid it in her hair and took it to Sri Lanka. I don't know what the karma of this is, but they're very happy to have this sacred relic in Sri Lanka, and it is enshrined at the Temple of the Tooth in Kandy. You can go to the temple, they rarely show the tooth. Oops. Now, in addition to these historical figures, we also have many images of women that are quite inspiring. These occur particularly in the Mahayana countries, in the northern Buddhist countries. The image that you see here is Tara, who's considered the mother of all Buddhas, and she comes in 21 different aspects. This is White Tara, who is especially supplicated for long life. If we're practicing Dharma, we need to have a long life. Tara can help. So in monasteries around the Tibetan Buddhist world, every morning and every evening, they say prayers to Tara, a female figure, in the monks' monasteries as well as the nuns' monasteries. Another figure is Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, also shown in female form, also known as the mother of all the Buddhas. This is Sarasvati, a bodhisattva who is in charge of the arts and education, music, and all of that. And this is Kuan Yin. Now, Kuan Yin is a specifically Chinese embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion. In India, Avalokiteshvara is male. In Tibet, he is male. And when he goes to China, he is also male for the first 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years. But around the year 1200 CE, the Bodhisattva of compassion does a sex change and becomes female. Gradually, of course, but she takes on female characteristics. And she is so famous all over the world. If you go to a Chinese restaurant, you'll probably find her there also, and in temples around the world. Now, why did Avalokiteshvara become female in China? There are many theories. The first is that Buddhism was just way too male. All the great teachers were male, even though women had equal opportunities, equal potential, but somehow, as history unfolded, most of the great masters were male. What happened? We don't know. We're missing the histories of the women. That's part of the equation too. And that's why now we're making such efforts to recover Buddhist women's history through Sakyadhita. Now, the second theory is that people automatically assume that compassion is a female characteristic. And truly, women are conditioned to be compassionate from a young age. We're taught to take care of others, to think more of others than ourselves. I think that's a wonderful thing. It does not always work well for women, but it's undeniable that women are trained to be kind and compassionate. And so probably in China too, they assumed that the Bodhisattva of compassion should be female. Another theory is that in China there were many female gods, and so for them it was natural to see these Buddhist figures also as female. So, and maybe you'll find more theories too, but these are a few. Now we also see wrathful images of women, especially in the Tantric tradition, Tantric Buddhist tradition, a branch of Mahayana. The theory is that we have many very powerful delusions. And for this, we need powerful forces to overcome them. And so they have these images of enlightenment in wrathful form, including many female images. This is Vajrayogini, for example. Now, what about women on the ground, real live women? Let's take a look around the world. This is Burma. In Burma, there are many thousands of nuns, but they are not fully ordained. They're ordained with 8, 9, or 10 precepts. They're not allowed to wear the yellow robes of the monks. So they found a middle way. Instead of wearing the white of a layperson, as nuns in Thailand and Cambodia and Laos do, they wear a sort of pink robe. And underneath it, they wear an orange skirt and have an ochre shawl on their shoulders. I see this as a kind of act of resistance, but that's simply my interpretation. In any case, nuns in Burma have opportunities for education. They can study Pali and Abhidharma and all the way up to the highest levels. And many of them excel and take high marks in the national exams. Not only nuns, of course, there are many lay women in Burma who are now meditating with full energy. And this is the lay meditation movement that's sweeping the world, and perhaps began in Burma, really, with lay teachers. Women can get a month off from work if they go to do a meditation retreat, and many do. Many even shave their heads to do the retreat. They'll ordain temporarily in Burma or Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. They have a tradition of temporary ordination and then go back to their jobs. So, but they will continue to practice meditation in the home as lay people. It's also an honored tradition. Now this is Thailand, and in Thailand, usually the nuns, called Meiji, keep 8 precepts. They actually keep more, but they take 8 precepts. They're celibate, and they live in monasteries either temporarily or they can take the precepts for life. Now in Bangkok, there's one nun who has advocated for full ordination in Thailand. Venerable Dhammananda was a university professor for many years, decades, and then became a nun in 1993 in Sri Lanka. She returned to Thailand and has built up her mother's monastery. Her mother was also a nun, and she is a strong advocate of full ordination for women. So she ordains the nuns and sends them to Sri Lanka to get full ordination. It's not possible yet in Thailand. She tried. She held one ordination, bringing a Sri Lankan monk to conduct it. But then they passed a law that foreign monks are not allowed to give ordinations in Thailand. And so they still are having to go to Sri Lanka to get full ordination. But there are more and more fully ordained nuns in Thailand. In fact, there are probably about 400 living in about 40 different monasteries. Now this is Laos. And of course, Laos has had a very sad history in recent times with the American bombings. And most of these women lost their entire families in those conflicts. And they saw so much suffering that they decided to join the monastery. They do get enough to eat, but they're just barely. Yeah, and they usually live in a compound in the back of a monk's temple, where women from the village will come and bring them their food. This is Nepal, and the nun that you see in the center is an extraordinary figure. Venerable Dhammawati, she's still with us. When she was a girl, only 13 years old, she ran away from home. She wanted to be a nun. She wanted to study the Dharma. She arrived on the border of Burma and was detained because she didn't have a passport. But gradually they saw that she was really sincere, and they placed her with a family, and then she was able to become a nun in Burma. She studied up to the highest levels that were available to her and took high marks, highest in the country actually. And then returned to Nepal, where she has helped to restore Theravada Buddhism in the Kathmandu Valley and beyond. She has tens of thousands of disciples, mostly lay women, and also 400 nuns. She went for full ordination against the advice of her male colleagues. The monks did not like this, but she did it anyway. She went to Los Angeles in 1988 and became a bhikkhuni there. And most of her nun disciples are also bhikkhunis. This is Sri Lanka. You can see they wear the yellow robes of a monk. And about half of them, there are probably 4,000 nuns in Sri Lanka, and almost half of, maybe more than half of them, are now fully ordained. This is all new, you see. This only happened after the first Sakyadhita conference. The first delegation from Sri Lanka had 16 people, and they told me that they had not heard the word bhikkhuni until the Sakyadhita conference in 1987. But once they heard the word bhikkhuni, they said, we have to have it. And they set about finding a way to get ordained with nuns in other countries and to bring this tradition into the Theravada Buddhist order in Sri Lanka. Now, it's not officially recognized It's not recognized by the monastic order, the male monastic order, or by the government. The nuns still cannot put their ordained name on their passport. But they are still very happy to be nuns. And if they like, to have the opportunity to become a bhikkhuni, fully ordained. In China, of course, now, after Sanghamitra went to Sri Lanka, the bhikkhuni order was established and thrived up to the 11th century when it died out. But luckily for us, in the 5th century, some Sri Lankan nuns traveled to China by ship. It took 2 years on the ship. And there they ordained Chinese women as nuns. The nuns had already been shaving their heads, but they wanted to get the ordination in the traditional way, which meant ordination by 10 bhikkhus and 10 bhikkhunis. And they did. And that lineage has continued up to the present day. It was also transmitted from China to Korea, to Taiwan, and to Vietnam. And we have access to it today. Now, of course, Buddhism in China had a really rough time from 1949 up until 1982. Buddhism was repressed, oppressed, monasteries destroyed all over China, not just Tibet, also all over China. And ordinations were not allowed to be held until 1982. The first one was held again. And since then, Buddhism has grown under strict government control. But nonetheless, women and men have the opportunities for ordination. People can take bodhisattva vows, and there are thousands of temples throughout China. Said that there are something like 80,000 bhikkhunis in China today, in different monasteries all over the country. In Korea, too, there are probably 8,000 fully ordained nuns, bhikkhunis, practicing, and they have very good opportunities for education. They struggled very hard, especially, after the Korean War, the country was destroyed, and they had to start again from scratch to renovate the monasteries. And they worked so hard, unbelievably hard, and they were successful. Now the Bhikkhuni order is very strong again in Korea. They have excellent opportunities for education, both in Buddhist institutes for nuns or at universities. They can choose. This was my own ordination in Korea. The Tibetans don't have full ordination yet. I think we're going to see a breakthrough soon, as we did in Bhutan. But at this time, 1982, there was no full ordination for nuns in the Tibetan tradition. So with the blessing of His and my other teachers, I traveled to Korea and Taiwan to receive full ordination. I was headed for Taiwan, but I found that in Korea, they were giving the ordination in the traditional way, with both bhikkhus, 10 bhikkhus and 10 bhikkhunis. And I knew that this would be important when I returned to Dharamsala. Who ordained you? If I said only bhikkhus, as was common in Taiwan at that time, they probably wouldn't accept it. But here, I had an opportunity to be ordained by both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And this is exactly what happened. When I returned to Dharamsala, to my studies in Dharamsala, they said, who ordained you? And I said, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. They said, okay. And now we still don't have full acceptance. We're not officially, but as the Dalai Lama has said, as long as the society accepts you, you are bhikkhunis in the Tibetan tradition. So, this is Vietnam. Again, there was the suppression of Buddhism after the, of course, devastation of what we call the Vietnam War, they call the American War. And especially during the period from 1976 to 82, many monks and nuns were jailed. Some died. But since 1982, Buddhism has revived and it's flourishing in Vietnam. There are some 20,000 fully ordained nuns in Vietnam, and the lay women are very active, very strong, very good practitioners, and very supportive of the nuns. So this is the conference that we held in Vietnam in 2010. And this is where I do most of my work, is in the Himalayan region, in Zanskar, Ladakh, Spiti, Kinnour, and in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh. Here in Zanskar, you can see the women in their traditional dress, and the two on the right are nuns. They've been nuns since they were children, and one is still alive. You can see they just went for cataract surgery, and so they received sunglasses after the cataract surgery with the label still on. These were the first 3 nuns who went to Tibet to receive the precepts, the 10 precepts of a novice nun, and returned to establish this monastery in Zanskar. Now, on the right, you'll see the monks' monastery. On the left, can you see it? The nuns' monastery. The monks' monastery has enormous support from the villagers. They have land holdings. The lay people work the land for them and give them the results, the proceeds. The nuns have no land holdings, and they get very little support from the villagers. So we've been helping through Jamyang Foundation there since 1991. This is a monastery in Zanskar, and they work so hard. You can see that there are almost no trees, but they are very proud to be able to grow these trees, and they were the first ones to grow an apricot tree in Zanskar, and they're very proud of that. So, the younger generation, of course, nowadays is getting education, both through the Indian government and the Jamyang Foundation, and they're very happy. They may not even know the struggles that the older generation endured. We introduced philosophical debate way back in 1993 and sent some of them to Dharamsala to study for higher education. When we began our work, most of the nuns were illiterate. They could not read. So we started with a literacy project, and the first group of 11 nuns from Tibet learned to read in 2 months, including the oldest one, who was 63 years old. Quite amazing. Since then, there have been many breakthroughs. Nuns are now wearing the yellow robe. For ceremonies, they're wearing the traditional hat. They're playing the traditional instruments. They're learning cham, ritual movement, or so-called lama dancing. They're attending international conferences around the world. And the young ones are studying. They have every opportunity to learn not only Buddhist studies, but also other subjects. They prefer going to the monastery to study than going to public schools, which are conducted in Hindi, which is not their language. The little ones are so cute, very sincere in meditation. And this is the first group of nuns to receive the Geshe degree, the highest degree in philosophy in the Tibetan tradition. There were 20 of them, including 6 of my own students, and they worked so hard. You can't imagine. I'm so proud of them. And they're going to do wonderful work, translating and teaching and retreats and so forth. Now, the final barrier, of course, is the full ordination nuns. His Holiness the Dalai Lama said that he personally favors ordination, full ordination for women, and he would like to see a Bhikkhuni Sangha in the Tibetan tradition. He's also said that he, as a single monk, cannot do that. It needs to be the decision of the senior monks, many of whom are opposed. Until today, he still has not been successful in convincing them. So he asked us to organize an international conference to discuss the issue of full ordination for women, which we did. 20 scholars of monastic discipline got together, and we concluded that it's possible. But unfortunately, the Tibetans still have not accepted this. And we're continuing the dialogue. I hope in my lifetime to see full ordination for women in all Buddhist countries. So in Zanskar, the nuns are doing terrific work. We have a volunteer program if people would like to participate. We are doing special programs in culture and environmental awareness. We bring them down to Bodh Gaya in the winter months when it's so cold, freezing cold up in these areas. And they study in Bodh Gaya. Now we want to build a temple for them. We have the dormitories, but we want to build a temple where they can get together and meditate and pray for the world. They're adorable. I love working with the nuns. They're so cute. And they're expanding their awareness of women's issues, especially through the volunteers. This is an English training program that we ran last year in Ladakh for 19 nuns, because of course English is a window to the world, and they want to know more. They want to know about Buddhists in other countries, so we can help. Last year, they sent me this Happy Women's Day message, which was delightful, because some people think that feminism is being imposed on these poor indigenous women. But on the contrary, I think that's rather insulting to assume that women don't recognize gender oppression. Of course they do. They talk about it all the time. They joke about it over the campfire at night. So they sent me this message. Feminism is not about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It is about changing the way the world perceives that strength. Empower women, empower the human community. So this is the younger generation, and they are truly changing the world. I'm praying for us all. So this is the organization that I founded back in 1987, specifically for education of Buddhist women. And we have 12 monasteries that we support in India. We've started 4 schools in Bangladesh for young girls, and many outreach programs. Then you're all familiar with Sakyadhita International, and I'm now sitting on the land of Sakyadhita, Hawaii, at Lai Peace Center. So wishing you all aloha, and thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Yes.
We're very happy, and it is raining here too, so we never know if the noise of the rain is from there or from here. So now, alguém tem perguntas? We're going to our question and answer session.
I'm sorry falar em português, speak português. Muito obrigada. Eu gostaria de saber se nas suas pesquisas tem a quantidade de monjas em monastérios femininos exilados na Índia, em Dharamsala, especificamente do budismo tibetano. Eu vi que você trouxe alguns dados de quantidade de monastérios na Coreia, na China, mas não especificou a quantidade de monjas hoje existente na Índia. Se você puder falar alguma coisa sobre isso.
Tati is willing to know if in your researches you came to know about the number of nuns in Tibetan monasteries in India, specifically in Dharamsala, maybe because she saw all the other numbers. She would like to know if you have this number, at least.
In India, but there may be many more, because if we look at the big ones, now many have each, some even have, one has 300. And so, we're still discovering monasteries. Over in Eastern India, I was traveling up to Mundhawang, Arunachal Pradesh, and the driver told me that his sister was a nun, and he pointed out her monastery, and he said it had 300 nuns. Also Theravada nuns throughout India, but they would be smaller in number, fewer in number. So it could be 3,000 easily. And of course, there are a lot of nuns staying in retreat also. And staying, yes, solitary, maybe together with maybe one or two other nuns. So there are many, actually.
Thank you. Susan made a question in the chat. She's asking how many girls who receive reading and literacy support are nuns, and how many are lay girls?
Well, in the monasteries, the students are all nuns, or they live like nuns. And then when they get older, they can decide if they want to continue as nuns. So this is a program from the nuns that you saw in the picture. Many of them are studying in government schools through the Ministry of Buddhist Culture from the Central Indian government. It took us many years to get these schools, and they're fully funded by the Indian government. Their requirement is that the girls should wear robes while they're studying. And then they stay in the monastery, and most of them do become nuns. But they have the option, if they like, to go back home. I had always hoped that lay women would come and study with the nuns, and that is happening in the first project that I founded, Jamyang Chilling in Dharamsala. There are lay girls studying there and doing a program in philosophy. But in the explain it, but it seems to be the culture. Now, these days, very few young boys are becoming monks. There are so many other opportunities for them to go into business and make money and, go to America and things. But the girls are still becoming nuns in record numbers. So this is something interesting to track. The opportunity is there. Anyone can study in our programs, but they do need to know Tibetan, because they're all Tibetan medium in India.
Thank you, Susan. Patrícia tem uma pergunta.
Venerable Karma Lekshe Tsomo, thank you so much for your talk. I'm so happy to see you again. Thank you for everything. These entire years, it's really impressive what you're doing. I wanted to ask you about education. How are you perceiving the effect education, these degrees in the study of Buddhism in the traditional schooling system? Is there any, by any chance, women are receiving the respect they deserve in the Buddhist communities, or it's still a bit awkward situation in terms of teaching and practicing and things like that? Thank you so much.
Well, actually, the education has made a huge difference in the perceptions of women. When women were illiterate and were merely reciting their prayers by memory, they did not get much respect. But I've seen a huge change over the last years. And of course, seeing nuns studying philosophy and even getting the Geshe degree. And that first batch was only the first of many batches. Every 2 years, there more and more nuns are becoming Geshes. And the people really respect them. And I think they're quite amazed and proud of them. And so they recognize that, contrary to there was a perception that women were stupid. The women themselves would say, when I first tried to start the literacy program, and I talked to the nuns, would you like to learn to read? Oh no, not me. I'm too stupid. You Western women, you go and learn to read. I'll just say, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. Then I thought, well, how do I convince them? So finally, after 2 weeks, I found the magic clue. And I said, if you learn to read, then you'll be able to understand the Dalai Lama's teachings. And they went, oh, sign me up. And so that's how it began. They saw the logic of, because people can attend the teachings, but most of them don't understand what's being said. In order to understand these magnificent teachings, we need to have access to the text. In order to have access to the text, we need to be able to read. Women did not have this opportunity in so many societies around the world until recently. Only the privileged, right? And the nuns, I should add. But so now that they have the opportunity, it's made a world of difference. And the nuns themselves recognize this. Before, people would not invite the nuns to do something like funerals, for example. This is where you get donations. But now, there are very few male lamas in the Himalayas doing these ceremonies. They do call the nuns. They invite the nuns. And they're happy to have the nuns because they can see that they're practicing so well with such sincerity. It's very inspiring. So this is a big change.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Oh, tem outra pergunta da Susan. Alguém no auditório tem mais alguma questão? O professor tem 2. Eu também tenho uma pergunta. So, more 4 last questions. Susan asked, do you think the draw of young women to become nun is based in part on the education they are getting in the monasteries, or do you think the draw and proliferation of women becoming nuns is motivated more so by access to Buddhist teachings?
I think it's both. And I also think that the nuns, at least in my experience, and especially in this region, they see the lives of their mothers as living as lay women and with, until recently, no access to birth control or modern health care. And they see the struggle, the sufferings of their mothers, and they really don't want to go through that. They'll say, we're so lucky to be nuns, we don't have to have babies. They do, the young girls say that. So they were ready to go to the monasteries, but if there's no food in the monastery, who will go? If there's no education, who will go? So now that they have education programs, it's a major draw. It's a major enticement for them. And in the beginning years, you see, we're still dependent on monks as teachers because the first classes of educated nuns are just graduating now. And some of them still don't have full confidence to take the role of teacher. We have to encourage them. So while we were dependent on male teachers, sometimes the nuns would go to those monasteries that had good education programs in Dharamsala or South India. There are more monastery programs. There's still a strong need for teachers, more teachers, better teachers. And we hope, I mean, my hope from the beginning was that the nuns will serve that role. They will be fully qualified to teach in the villages, in the monasteries, everywhere.
That would be a wonderful outcome. And I just want to thank you for your inspiring talk. It was really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Professor Plínio?
Faço a pergunta em português e você traduz? Pode ser? Assim o pessoal consegue acompanhar. Venerable Karma Lekshe Tsomo. Nice to meet you. I will do the question in Portuguese so people here can follow up, but I believe you can read there. So, let's go. No sistema do Anuttara Yoga Tantra, nós temos a imagem das mulheres colocadas na sua forma, a gente pode colocar na sua forma sexual. Né? Então, nós temos a convivência de um monasticismo celibatário, tanto para homem quanto para mulher, por um lado. Por outro lado, você tem ícones que são colocados na sua forma de maior sexualidade possível, da exposição do corpo, com posições sexuais. Isso é colocado dentro dos monastérios e na forma da mulher, forma feminina. São Budas femininos. Então, nós temos o direcionamento do desejo para o nu feminino, né? A sabedoria é o nu feminino, que expressa uma sabedoria elevada do nirvana, da paz definitiva, combinada com prazer. E, por outro lado, nós temos monges e monjas celibatários, e a gente viu ali ela colocando as imagens, quando aparece monjas, vira de costa. Eles viram de costa. Numa atitude aparente de negação do desejo. Então, você tem deidades que você é inspirado a ter desejo pelo nu feminino, e, por outro lado, você tem a negação desse nu, dizendo, não, eu não posso, eu sou um celibatário. Então, como que ela vê a convivência entre essas duas antinomias? Né? O desejo e não desejo. E como o desejo supera como o desejo faz para superar a questão do próprio desejo em si do sexo. Acho que é muito complicado para ela escrever. Vamos ver se ela vai conseguir. So I will try to put that in English. This is a big question. It's anthropological in many aspects of the question. The question is like this. Inside of the Vajrayana monasteries, we have the iconography of the enlightened Buddhas in feminine form, but these forms are naked, and many times in sexual positions. And then we have the union between Yab Yung, right? The union, sexual union, as a symbol of the union of method and wisdom. And the woman is always put as the wisdom, but the form is sexual form. But then you put an image there, and not just, we can see not just the protest, but the male like that. I don't want to watch the woman, the nuns walking. But at the same time, you have the images of Vajrayogini, Arayatara, naked, in sexual postures and so forth. So I want to know, what's your view on about this apparent antinomy, you know, a contradiction? One side, celibatary, another side, I have images of the Buddha that I can desire. I have the desire in the center. How do you see the transformation of desire through this kind of a Buddhist view or practice that can transform the ordinary sexual ordinary sexual desire and desire itself into an enlightened way of desiring or enlightened form of desire? That's my question. What's your view about that?
Well, as you rightly said, the whole point is to transform sexual desire, to sublimate it. So this is a very controversial issue. Most Buddhists in the world do not accept Tantra as legitimate Buddhism. It's a tradition that's been passed on secretly for hundreds of years and now has become public in the modern world. And there are many myths the practice. If a person is a monastic, they maintain their celibacy and if they do these practices, they do them in visualization, not in actuality. If you practiced with an actual consort, then you would give up your vows of celibacy and return to lay status. So now, what this means for women, I think that in a sense, it could be, I can't speak for all women. And women who do these practices, there are books about it. It could be very empowering. I mean, what is shameful about the female body, after all? Why is the female body sexualized anyway? Here we're talking about the transformation of the mind. And this is the whole point of all the Buddhist traditions, is to transform the mind. In the mind, there is no gender. The mind does not have genitalia. It's society that sends these signals, right? So I would say that, first of all, these practices need to be done on a strong foundation of ethics and compassion. The 3 levels of vows. And one is, even as a layperson, they would take 5 precepts, which entails basically monogamy, that, you know, like one at a time. Yeah, you don't sort of mess around. You do control your sexuality through the basic 5 precepts of the lay practitioner. And that would pertain to the higher practices. The Bodhisattva precepts then are built on that basis, and then the Tantric precepts are built on that. So it's a very complicated question, and it's also a very controversial question. And I'd be happy to suggest some resources on that, if you like.
Thank you so much. Thank you for addressing the question. Thank you.
Fernanda, do you have a question?
Yes, if you point out some suggestions on further lectures on about the feminine inside of the Tantra, would be wonderful for us here in Brazil to continue to do some research in this area.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Also, it might be helpful to post an anecdote that anecdote that, in order to do these practices, you have to have great qualities. You have to have perfect renunciation, even to enter the Bodhisattva path. One needs to have perfect renunciation, not just of, chocolate and coffee, but renunciation of samsara, the wheel of birth and death. Then you need perfect bodhicitta, means that 24/7 you think of nothing but the welfare of others. And third, you need to have direct insight into emptiness, right? This is before we could even begin. This is when we're just beginning the bodhisattva path. You need those three qualifications, those three prerequisites. And Tantra is even more so. So for example, if you can eat a pile of human feces 5 feet tall, you're ready to practice Tantra with an actual consort. Are you ready? So one time someone asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama, how many people in the world today are qualified to practice Tantra with an actual consort? And he said, no one. So I think we need to be very clear and very careful about this, because the idea of tantric practice can be so easily exploited. And this has huge implications for women, and we see it exploited in Dharma centers around the world. It's a huge scandal. It's, we should not have to read about this on the front page of the New York Times. We need to educate people.
Exactly. You are touching my question. My question is exactly this pressure. One side, you have the image doing, and then you have your side that's desiring to do that, but you cannot because you don't have the qualifications or the realizations and so forth. So it creates a tension. Não vai dar. Travou.
But once you see the power of the enlightened mind, then actually ordinary sexual desire looks really unattractive. You remember that story in the early Buddhist texts when one of the monks was very attached to his wife. He tried to meditate, but when he meditated, all he could see was the image of his wife. He was obsessed with her, and he wanted so badly to be a pure monk, but he was having big trouble. So he went to the Buddha and told him about his situation. And the Buddha took him up to one of the heavens and showed him the women up in the heavens. So beautiful, so attractive. And when he came back, he found that he thought his wife looked like a monkey, and his desire was completely eradicated. So Tantra is something like that. The pleasure of a sexual activity is really quite limited, if we're honest about it. It's hyped in the media to sell everything, including a bar of soap. But in reality, it's pretty ordinary and boring. So the powers of the mind are so more magnificent. And that's what Tantra is ultimately trying to show us.
Thank you so much for bringing up the son of Mahapajapati, the Venerable Nanda. Later, the Arhat Nanda. It's Buddha Charita. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the answer too. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 more questions. I will do my question together of the Nan Fernanda question. I would like to ask, in your experience in the Tibetan tradition, that you mentioned that every day they do prayers for Tara and so on and so forth. And both female and male practitioners also do practices of Tara. And Tara is the mother of all Buddhas and so on and so forth in the Tibetan tradition. She's very respected, she's very mentioned, she's everywhere in the Tibetan tradition. But still, many Tibetan monks, many of the old Sangha, do not accept the idea of ordination for women, or they think that women do not have a good rational mind, they're more emotional, they just do prayers and it's okay. How do you see this kind of contradiction if you have this so strong image of Tara, and by the other side, this women power of Tara does not seems to be in the reality of Tibetan tradition? And in continuity, the question of the nun Sandro here, she asked which are the challenges that you see for the female community nowadays? What are the latest challenges? You may say like that.
Well, yes, we've pointed this out, that there's a huge contradiction between the ideals in Buddhism and realities on the ground. In theory, women are perfectly capable of liberation or even perfect enlightenment in the Mahayana traditions. And yet on the ground, we still see attitudes towards women are just embarrassing. And the treatment of women, Buddhist institutions, there are almost no women in Buddhist institutions. Buddhist institutions in every country, every tradition are completely 100% male. There's one exception in Korea where a woman was allowed in a position of authority in the Buddhist order, administration. And then a second one. So, this is exactly what we're trying to transform, these attitudes. And of course, women ourselves we find that we have also these attitudes in our own minds sometimes. We also have imbibed these social conditioning and lost confidence in our own abilities. And this is what I think the Buddhist women's movement is really helping to transform. That women education is a big part of it, but also encouraging one another. We can't expect to change the whole society all at once. This movement is 35 years old, and look what we've done. I think it's quite remarkable. And I'm so proud that you have your chapter in Sao Paulo. I mean, it's just beyond our dreams. Everything that Sakyadhita has accomplished is far beyond our dreams. In 1987, when we sat down on the ground in a circle in Bodh Gaya, honestly, it's amazing. And I'm just delighted to see the changes. And of course, we need more changes. But it's exactly what you're doing. You women in Brazil are studying so nicely and studying Buddhism so well and getting higher degrees that will put you in positions to help transform attitudes toward women. So I think the best way, we could protest, we could go to the streets, but the most important thing is to embody the ideals that we hold so strongly. And today on International Women's Day, I mean, in particular, we can remember the advances that women have made. Of course, we've got huge setbacks, especially in this country, huge setbacks, but we're working on it. And the stronger women become, more educated, well-spoken, skillful in managing these situations, then the more things will continue to improve. I have every confidence.
Thank you so much, teacher. So, mais alguém tem alguma pergunta? No? Okay. So, thank you so much, Venerable Karma Lekshe Tsomo, for your time here, for your great speech. That's so important to share experiences with us. Thank you so much, everybody that's still online, Susan, Ana Paula, Sibeli Aldrovandi, and so on. Muito obrigada a todos que estiveram aqui presentes até agora conosco. A gente Sim. We hope we can talk more times in other situations. We hope to see you again very soon. And if you would like to stay online, we'll just finish to make the last homages, to sortear, to give some books and so on. Otherwise, thank you so much. We see each other very soon, I hope. I will write both for you and also for Susan, because Susan, I had a question for your speech that I find out that was the question of at least 2 more persons here, so I will write it down for you after.
Okay. Stay if you want. Yeah, I can stay if you want. It's no problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you. I really appreciate this wonderful opportunity and all your hard work to put everything together so beautifully and so respectfully. You really did a beautiful job, all of you. And translating all the talks into English was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Muito bem. Pessoal, eu vou pedir a ajuda da Cibele para vir aqui para me ajudar a fazer. Nós vamos sortear aqui um livro, a coleção de versos indicativos, o Dona Vaga. Vocês devem ter ouvido falar do Dhammapada, né? Um texto que foi bastante traduzido. E essa aqui é a versão sânscrita do Dhammapada, são poemas, então pode pegar um aí, Ciba. Vamos ver quem é aqui. 25. Lívia. Cadê a Lívia? A gente vai entregar para a Lívia depois, porque ela vai estar lá pela casa do estudante, então ela vai ganhar o livro. Está reservado para ela, vocês estão de testemunha. Sibeli, você quer cuidar disso? Não, esse aqui. Ok. Então, gente, muito obrigada pela participação de todos. Espero ver vocês novamente em algum outro momento. E é isso aí. A gravação estará disponível, eu espero, amanhã ou quanto antes, no nosso YouTube, no canal da Sakyadhita. A gente entra em contato com quem gostaria de receber mais mensagens. É isso, a gente conversa no final. Alguma coisa assim? Ok, então, boa noite a todos. Até breve. Pode fechar?